Let's say I have a video I want my students to watch in my course, but I want to know that they actually watched it. And more importantly, I want to prompt them with questions to confirm that they understood what the video was about. Since video is often a replacement for in-class lecture, let's think of it in terms of how we think about lecture. If I were giving a short lecture to a class, I would pause from time to time to ask questions or provide more contextual information. Interactive video is how I accomplish that through H5P. Interactive video allows me to provide a video to my students in my course that will occasionally pause and provide them with additional contextual information. I can also incorporate graded elements into this video by adding simple question types that I've already learned how to create, for example, multiple choice. So let's talk about how to create our own H5P interactive video. We'll of course begin the content bank by clicking the Add menu, then scrolling down and selecting Interactive Video. For the rest of this tutorial, I will be in full screen mode, but you can use whichever mode you like. Like every H5P activity we've created up to this point, we will need to add a title. We'll then need to engage in the 3 steps that it takes to create an H5P interactive video. And the cool part is, you actually don't need one of those steps. The first step is where you upload or embed your video. The second step is where we'll add interactions. And the third step, which is entirely optional, is where we add a summary task for our students to reply to. Adding a video means clicking inside the plus box, then uploading a video file into this activity, or pasting a YouTube link or another external URL. It's worth noting that while interactive video does support YouTube or Vimeo, it does not support Kaltura at this time. We do recommend using a streaming service rather than uploading a file. That's because students who view an interactive video, or really any H5P activity type, need to download the entire activity to their computer before it will load in their browser. That means that if you upload a very large video file into this activity, that very large video file has to be completely downloaded to their computer before they can view it. I'm going to paste in my YouTube link to the video that we were looking at the beginning of, well, this video. Once I've pasted that link, I'll click Insert. Now that I have my video selected, I'm ready for step 2. Step 2 is where I add interactions over top of my video. The interface for adding interactions to an interactive video in H5P is yet another example of how H5P rewards you for learning to use it. In fact, if you think back to the work that we were doing in previous weeks learning to create course presentation, you'll notice that the course presentation creation interface for adding interactive elements to slides in a course presentation is very similar to the interface that you'll use to add interactive elements to an interactive video. In course presentation, if you wanted to add something like a multiple choice question to the activity, you would open the slide where that multiple choice question should live and then add it to the slide. In interactive video, there is no slide. Instead, you'll need to find the spot on the playhead where you'd like the video to stop. For this part, I recommend muting the video. I'm going to select a random spot in my video, but you're welcome to choose any spot that you like. For sake of demonstration, this is where I want to add one of my questions. And the cool thing is, since you learned to create several question types in week 1 of this course, H5P is once again rewarding you with the exact same interface for adding a multiple choice, true false, fill in the blanks, or drag and drop style questions, along with a few others that you may not have seen yet, but that are relatively easy to learn. I'm going to click true false to create a simple true false question, which will take me to the exact same form that I've used to create true false questions on their own, in question set, and in course presentation. But this time you may notice I have a few extra options at the very top. These options control when that true false question is displayed, how it's displayed, and whether or not a label accompanies it. My personal preference that I suggest you also use is enable pause video, which pauses the video when the students reach this question, and set display as not as a button, but as a poster. Selecting display as poster forces the full question to display for learners instead of a simple button, which they may not realize they have to click on. From here, it's simply filling out the true-false form that you've seen when you've created true-false questions elsewhere in H5P. Once you've finished creating your question, click the Done button at the bottom or top of the screen. By default, your question's probably not going to look the way that you want it to, but just like interactions in course presentation and drag and drop, you can drag this element around the screen and use the corners and sides to resize it the way that you want it to look. I'm going to put mine right about here. So based off of the settings that I chose, when my students are playing the video, it will pause when it reaches this question, and the question will display by default like this, rather than as a button. There are certainly other types of interactions I can add, including non-graded interactions like an image or an external link to a resource. There are also advanced features that we're not going to touch on, like navigation hotspots that can jump the students ahead to a different part of the video, or crossroads, which creates a choose-your-own-adventure style path through the video that you've uploaded. After you've added interactions to your video, you can optionally move to step 3, which is summary task. Summary task is actually the summary H5P activity, which you'll find in the content bank. A summary style question is sort of like a true-false and a multiple choice question had a child. By that I mean there's no formal question text. Instead, the students select from a list of responses, and only one response can be correct. Again, you do not need to use this part of the video. In fact, I usually recommend against it because it doesn't always display in the way that you expect or hope. Instead, I would add the bulk of your interactions in step 2 of the creation process. Before we move on to save, there's one other area that I think we should take a closer look at. It's down towards the bottom of this page, and it's called behavioral settings. You may have seen this in other activities because it's a simple way to control how an H5P activity behaves when students interact with it. I'll click behavioral settings to expand those settings. Most of these options can be comfortably ignored, but there are a few that we'll call out that can sometimes be helpful. The first is start video at. If you're using a YouTube video that someone else has published, but the first minute or so is kind of fluffy, that like, subscribe, follow for more info, and the actual meat of the video isn't until about 90 seconds in, you can use start video at to have it jump ahead when the students begin playing it. There are some other settings that you may find to be helpful. For example, I like to enable show button for rewinding 10 seconds. If I don't enable this, my students have to click and drag the playhead on the player, which won't always get them back to where they want to be. So instead, I'm going to give them a simple button that lets them jump back 10 seconds, sort of like they would have if they were streaming video from Netflix or Disney+. One last setting I want to call out on here is disable navigation. By default, this is not activated, but you can optionally choose to disable navigation forwards or forwards and backwards. If you enable this, this means that students will not be able to jump ahead in a video, or they won't be able to jump ahead or behind. While this may sound like a very attractive option because it would prevent students from just skipping ahead to each interaction and answering questions without actually watching the video, it's important to note that enabling either forward or forward and backward does break accessibility features in this video for students who cannot navigate with a pointing device like a mouse. So if you have a student with a severe mobility impairment who navigate the web with something like a keyboard or eye tracking software, using the disable navigation feature will make this activity inaccessible to those students. So for now, I'm going to leave this as none. That's all that I have to do for now. Since I'm in full screen mode, I'll click proceed to save, then scroll to the bottom of the page and click save. This loads a preview of my interactive video. And like with other activities, I like to test it out to make sure that it's behaving the way that I expect. For example, I have an interaction here, and I want to make sure that my video is actually going to stop and prompt my learners to answer that question before they can continue. In this case, it looks like I'm correct. As a reminder, once students reach the end of your video, they'll be prompted with a summary screen. This screen will show them how they performed on the interactions throughout your video. And most importantly, they will need to click the Submit Answers button to actually submit their work to you if this is a graded activity. We strongly recommend incorporating this into your activity instructions if you're using this activity for a grade. Finally, for those of you wondering if you should use interactive video or Kaltura instead, it's worth noting that both interactive video and the Kaltura video quiz allow you to have interactive elements that are graded. I personally find interactive video to be slightly easier to use, especially since I've learned to use question types in H5P as well as other activities like course presentation. And it's an easy, simple way to create a basic video with interactions that the students have to respond to. That said, H5P interactive video will track how students respond to individual questions as well as their grades if this is a graded activity. But statistics like watch time are only tracked through a Kaltura video. So do keep that in mind as you're deciding which one you want to use.